One, two, and three. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, I welcome all of you to today's special webinar with a distinguished guest. Before we begin, as a tradition, we do treaty acknowledgement. The Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located in the campus on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Before we start this session, CRIC hosts webinars on important local and global conflict issues in order to continue dialogue between and among various social groups, activists, policymakers, and academics. The primary objective of such webinar is based on dialogue and multilogue and is to engage a diverse group of peoples, those who are able to provide conflict transformation ideas and also suggest peace building activities. Keeping such an objective in mind, today will be the 18th episode of CRIC's webinar series in this year. Our today's theme is Road for Justice for Rohingya. This is the fifth episode that we aired containing Rohingya crisis as a theme and its resolution. Dear audience, you can find the past episodes in our webpage at the webinar archive corner. Rohingya crisis research is our significant project, and our book contains detailed analysis and suggested peace-building avenues that was published by Lexington Books, United States of America in January 2020. Those who are not very aware of the Rohingya genocide, Rohingyas are an ethnic minority in Myanmar, which was also known as Burma till 1988. Most of them were concentrated on the northern part of the Rakhine state, which is also known as Arakan. This group is not acknowledged as a minority within the 135 ethnic groups in Myanmar. Since 1982, they also lost their rights as a citizen of Myanmar. Since the military rule that started in 1962, they were subjected to brutal attack and forced displacement by Tatmadaw. Within the past 50 years, they were expelled from their lands numerous times, and among these, three largest displacements took place in 78, 91, and last in 2017. As a result, nearly 1.3 million of them now have taken refuge in Bangladesh. Besides Bangladesh, they also live in more 8 countries in the world. International Court of Justice recently heard the case in January 2020 and ruled some interim measures to stop further genocide. Canada also joined hands to support the trial at the International Court of Justice and acknowledges it as a genocide. Dear audience, our today's session is particularly dedicated to learn more about the justice and accountability aspects of the crisis from an expert. We are also joined today with 2 of the observers, and they will be joining the discussions during the Q&A session. Dear audience, you can also join the session as it is live streamed in our Facebook page and YouTube channel, and you are always welcome to send your questions for the speaker. Before I hand over to the speaker, I also have a personal note to make. I am a big fan of our today's guest since 2017, as I intently listened to his CBC Messi lecture titled In Search of a Better World, A Human Rights Odyssey. CBC Ideas broadcast it, and it was a powerful survey of some of the major human rights struggle of our times. And the speaker was none other than Professor Payam Akhavan. Without further ado, let me introduce the speaker today. Professor Dr. Payam Akhavan is a counsel in the Genocide Convention case between the Gambia and Myanmar at the International Court of Justice. He is also the counsel to Bangladesh at the International Criminal Court. He is the member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, former United Nations prosecutor at The Hague. He currently teaches at the Massey College, University of Toronto. So, Professor Payam Akhavan, the floor is yours, and we are immensely grateful for your time and your energy today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmad, to you and to the Conflict and Resilience Research Institute for inviting me. And thank you also to those colleagues that have joined us today. I begin, since we're talking about the region of Bangladesh and Myanmar and the great history which precedes it, with a brief line from the inimitable Rabindranath Tagore, the great Bengali philosopher and poet, who said that faith is the bird that feels the light when the dawn is still dark. And I say this because this is very much the story of the struggle for justice for the Rohingya against what was once impossible, overwhelming odds. And I'm very pleased today to share with you some reflections about that journey. Although I must emphasize that while I do serve as counsel in the cases before both the International Court of Justice and International Criminal Court, I speak today in my personal capacity and not on behalf of any of my clients. Some time ago, I remember when I was at McGill University, Bob Ray came on a panel and we were discussing the plight of the Rohingya, which of course is one of the most pressing challenges in the human rights world. And sadly, we have this pattern of the world failing to prevent genocide, failing to intervene against ongoing genocide, and then having to struggle after the fact to see whether it's possible to achieve some measure of accountability. So one of the ideas that emerged from this discussion was how one could utilize the International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice to give some measure of justice to the Rohingya. This was in 2018, just a few months after the so-called clearance operations in August of 2017, which resulted in mass exodus of what is now a population of over 1 million refugees in neighboring Bangladesh. And just 3 weeks ago, I was in Kutupalong refugee camp, which I visited several times. And it is very difficult to convey in words the sea of misery which is captured by this vast population, I believe 500,000 in Kutupalong alone, and the horrific stories of suffering that they recount. So I think it's befitting that the name of your organization is the Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, because the Rohingya are an extraordinary example of resilience in the face of this unspeakable suffering. So to begin with, the International Criminal Court, of course, like other international courts, only has jurisdiction in respect of states that have accepted it. And Myanmar, predictably, is not a party to the statute of the International Criminal Court. And it's not difficult to understand why certain governments with appalling human rights records would not wish to invite the court to scrutinize their conduct. However, Bangladesh is a state party to the International Criminal Court, and through a bit of creative lawyering, the idea emerged that although the crimes against the Rohingya are being committed on the territory of Myanmar, the crime of deportation, which involves basically expelling people across an international boundary, commences on the territory of Myanmar, but is completed on the territory of Bangladesh. And this began as a sort of a creative thinking outside the box approach towards vesting the court with jurisdiction. In 2018, in April, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court requested an opinion from a pretrial chamber of the court as to whether this could be a basis for the jurisdiction of the court. And in September of 2018, the pretrial chamber ruled that, in fact, the court did enjoy jurisdiction over the crime of deportation only insofar as it was completed on the territory of Bangladesh, and that became the basis for an investigation which is ongoing by the International Criminal Court. And of course, this was not a satisfactory solution because it was only one slice of the massive crimes being committed against the Rohingya. But we have to be very sober in the struggle for justice and understand that some justice is better than no justice. So we're not dealing with ideal circumstances. And the mere fact that there is now an investigation before the court is highly significant. And of course, at the same time, there was this concern that the elephant in the room, the legal elephant in the room, the crime of genocide, which is staring us straight in the face, based on the extensive findings of the United Nations fact-finding mission, which, based on interviews with more than 1,000 survivors and witnesses, concluded in 2018 that the so-called ethnic cleansing campaign against the Rohingya, in fact, qualified as genocide. So the question is, well, how can we also ensure accountability for the crime of genocide? So the idea emerged that in addition to the ICC, which deals with individual criminal responsibility, the International Court of Justice, also situated in The Hague, could also be potentially engaged in respect of state responsibility, the responsibility of Myanmar under the 1948 Genocide Convention, adopted in the shadow of the Holocaust, which obligates states to prevent and to punish the crime of genocide. And we were fortunate that the Minister of Justice of the Gambia at the time, Mr. Abu Bakr Tambadou, who was a former colleague of mine at the United Nations Tribunal for Rwanda, at a meeting of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Bangladesh, visited Kutupalong, the same camp that I just mentioned, and he was so moved by the suffering that he saw that he decided that the Gambia would bring a case against Myanmar before the International Court of Justice. Now, the problem with the International Court of Justice is that only states can be parties to disputes. It's not possible for NGOs, for victims, for survivors, and what have you, to access the court. So we needed a plaintiff state. And very often, states will not act unless they have a very pressing interest to do so. And it takes a certain imagination and moral courage for a state to bring a case against another state merely to uphold universal human rights values, even where that state has no political or economic or other interest. And it's quite remarkable that it was the tiny West African nation of the Gambia, with a population of 2 million, which since 2016 had restored democracy after 20 years of dictatorship, that became the moral champion on the world stage. Although I should add that it was with the support of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, in which Bangladesh played a very important role, And we must bear in mind that it is Bangladesh that is at the very front line of this conflict, having housed and welcomed more than 1 million refugees in circumstances where I cannot imagine any country in the Western world, despite its prosperity and affluence, that would accept such a population to be on its territory. So by 11 November 2019, a second front was opened in the struggle for accountability when the Gambia filed its application before the International Court of Justice under the 1948 Genocide Convention, which Myanmar was a party to and which provided for the jurisdiction of the ICJ. And what's remarkable is how this became a catalyst for the ICC to declare 3 days later, on November 14, that it would authorize an investigation by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, a decision which had been delayed for some time since the earlier decision on jurisdiction in September of 2018. With the filing of the application, the Gambia also requested what are called provisional measures, which are the equivalent of an injunction, a means of coming quickly before the court to try and protect the Rohingya against further genocidal acts until such time as the court could consider fully the case on the merits, which can be a matter of 3 or 4 years. So the urgency of the situation compelled us to bring this case before the International Court of Justice. And on the 10th of December, 2019, 10th of December being, of course, Human Rights Day, the day in which the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we came before the court in an attempt to speak truth to power using the principal judicial organ of the United Nations and the moral weight which it embodies. As a small story, I should add that our minds and hearts were with those who were still suffering in the refugee camps. And of course, it was very important for them to be part of this historic process, which took us into uncharted waters where we did not know what the outcome would be. But it was very clear that we had to do what we can. And through the work of some extraordinary unsung heroes, who unfortunately I cannot name for their own protection, who managed to arrange for 3 remarkable representatives of the Rohingya to come from Kutupalong and attend the hearings in The Hague. And this was one of the most unforgettable experiences I've ever had. Now, our friends who came, Mr. Yusuf and Miss Hasina and Hamida, who have now become dear friends, and it's remarkable how across barriers of culture and language, one can develop such a deep friendship, even though we come from different planets. And these 3 courageous souls had never been on an aircraft before. So in 24 hours, they went on their first ever airplane trip. And I should add, it was on Emirates, which is not a bad airline to go on for the first time. And they came to The Hague. And they came to the majestic Peace Palace, which is a very intimidating building to be in. And they came before a panel of 17 judges in the same room as Aung San Suu Kyi to hear the lawyers of the Gambia put the evidence of these horrific crimes before this court, which is the guardian of the Genocide Convention, and before the eyes of the international community. And having them in the courtroom was a reminder that in this distant world of legal pleadings with professors and practitioners who are all, very sophisticated in their litigation skills and what have you, there was the humbling realization of the extraordinary evil and pain, which we had to try and recreate in that courtroom so the judges would appreciate the magnitude of the challenge that was before the court. Following the hearing on January 23rd of 2020, the court unanimously, 17 votes to 0, upheld our request for provisional measures and ordered Myanmar to take all necessary measures within its power to prevent further acts of genocide. Now, it's very difficult to know what the impact of these proceedings have been. The Rohingya continue to suffer persecution, systematic discrimination. But we hope at least that the 600,000 Rohingya who still remain in Myanmar may have been given some measure of protection by the scrutiny of Myanmar's conduct before the court. Now, the court subsequently ordered the parties to submit their written pleadings, which are known as the memorial and the counter memorial, respectively. The Gambia's legal team has been busy over the past several months amassing a significant volume of evidence to put its case properly to the court. We will be submitting that brief in exactly 1 month from today, on the 23rd of October, which is the time limit fixed by the court. And then Myanmar would, of course, have the opportunity to submit its counter memorial. And sometime upon the conclusion of these written pleadings, there will be oral pleadings at The Hague, after which the court would make its judgment. I want to speak before concluding my remarks and opening the floor for discussion, the recent events that have once again put the question of accountability on the global agenda, namely the reports in the media, including the New York Times and CBC, that two Myanmar soldiers who had deserted from the armed forces had requesting protection from the government, confessing to acts of mass murder and rape against Rohingya civilians, the burning of villages, acting under orders, specific orders by their commanders, basically to exterminate, to kill all Rohingya, irrespective of whether they are children or elderly. And the reports that these two individuals are now in The Hague as part of an ICC investigation. I, of course, cannot comment on the details of that process or the identity of these two persons of interest, except to confirm that, in fact, two individuals did present themselves at a border post in Bangladesh around the middle of August, requesting protection. They confessed to these horrific crimes, and they are no longer in Bangladesh. Where they are, what happened to them, I cannot comment on, except that Bangladesh did what it had to, consistent with its obligations under the ICC statute. And this is a highly significant development because now, for the first time, we're hearing the testimony of perpetrators. It's one thing to hear the testimony of survivors, yet another for the perpetrators now to come forward and to confirm what we've known all along, that it's impossible for the destruction of 400 villages in Rakhine State, for the displacement of some 1 million refugees, that these were, as Myanmar's agent Aung San Suu Kyi suggested to the court, random or isolated war crimes by a few bad soldiers. There is now unmistakable evidence that this is part of a systematic policy to eliminate the age old historic presence of the Rohingya minority from their ancestral lands, from their home. And we now have at least two soldiers who have testified that they acted and committed these unspeakable atrocities under direct orders from their commanders. And I believe that it's only a matter of time before more people will come forward and share similar stories. And I say this because achieving justice against these odds is always a long game. One will inevitably be frustrated by expecting that accountability can achieve immediate and quick results. It's said that justice delayed is justice denied. In the game of international criminal justice, I would say justice delayed is justice delivered. And I worked with the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in my 20s as a young man, as a prosecutor. And I witnessed the Srebrenica genocide, in which some 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys were executed. And I would have never, never in my wildest dream imagined that the so-called butcher of Bosnia, General Ratko Mladic, who was untouchable and invincible, seemingly at the time, would one day end up as a defendant in The Hague. And it took 16 years, but sure as you know it, he ended up as a defendant in The Hague. He was recently convicted of genocide, sentenced to life in prison. So we have to ensure that beyond the shifting headlines, in the fleeting attention span of political leaders and the media, that we keep the issue of accountability for the Rohingya alive, and that we do what we can to deter such future atrocities, and at least to vindicate in some measure the terrible suffering of the survivors. And I will end by speaking once again about resilience, because you're the Center for Resilience, and to say how incredibly humbling and inspiring it has been to speak to the likes of Hamida and Hasina and Yusuf and the thousands of others languishing in those camps, who, despite having lost everything, still hold on to their dignity and demand justice. And they, in fact, are my true clients, my true bosses. And it has been an incredible honor to be able to give, in however a small measure, some glimmer of hope to these people. So that's why I will end once again with Rabindranath Tagore, who said, "Faith is the bird that feels the light when the dawn is still dark." And this is an extraordinary story of hope and resilience. And it's a story which is just beginning, and it is certainly not at an end. So I thank you once again for this kind invitation and for your patience. And I'm happy to now open the floor to any comments that people may have.
Thank you, Professor Payam Akhavan, such a brilliant and eloquent speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, there are important aspects Professor has rightly pointed out, that it will take some time to deliver justice, but this is a unique situation through the International Court of Justice, where justice delayed is not justice denied, rather justice is delivered. And the professor rightly mentioned to all of us that we have to wait and see seemingly untouchable people can be brought to justice. Is a matter of time. So this is a very important takeaway from his speech, as I believe, from the center. And we appreciate Professor Payam's very insightful talks. Those who do not know about Professor Payam's, exposure to Bangladesh, let me share. I was talking to him before he actually joined today's session. He extensively traveled in the southern part of Bangladesh. He knows very well about Sundarban. Also, although he missed Royal Bengal tiger for some reason, and but he is very well aware of the whole coast up to Saint Martin's. That means the whole southern part, and Saint Martin's is very close to Rakhine border. So he is very well aware of the situation, and he spent a whole month of the August in Bangladesh visiting all these places, especially the Kutupalong camp. And we appreciate and we take pride because he is a Canadian, and that is how the involvement of Canada begins. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me open up the discussion room for question and answer session. And I would like to first give chance to director and Dr. Clint Carl from Museum of Human Rights, who somehow couldn't join with us in the video streaming, but he was listening the whole discussion by phone. Dr. Clint, if you want to join the discussion, we are listening to you. Please, if you have any questions, you can go ahead, sir, now.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Ahmed. And also, I'd like to begin by congratulating Professor Payam on a very clear and timely presentation on the activities at the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. I was particularly touched by the way that Professor Akhavan was able to not only discuss the legal aspects, but also to set before our eyes the people, the Rohingya people, the suffering of these people, their plight, and the moral injunction, the moral need for us to not forget, but to carefully attend to our brothers and sisters in humanity, the Rohingya, and to stand by their side and to insist on accountability. These things immediately struck me. But Professor Akhavan, I do have a question I would like to put to you, and the question regards the possible remedies, the legal remedies that are available through the International Court of Justice. So this is a question, I guess, that is one a legal question, but also I would also like you to address sort of the practicalities of enforcement. So if we could ask you to reflect a little on what possible remedies may be available should there be a finding of genocide at the International Court of Justice. What would be the remedies, and what is your assessment of how these remedies might be put into practice or effected? So thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Clint, I think two answers. One is that the mere fact of litigating these issues and giving them some attention, I believe, has some measure of deterrence. So that maybe that's not answering in a legalistic way your question about what are the remedies. But as I explained earlier, part of the value of such litigation is simply to deter further atrocities by exacting a cost, by showing that there is a platform where these crimes will be exposed. It's about bearing witness, in effect, but within the confines of a legal process. But in response to your very good, astute question, the application of the Gambia has requested certain remedies. The first and most obvious is what we call a declaratory judgment, a judgment that in fact genocide has been committed. And that itself has a great value. No state in the world wants to be known as a state that has committed genocide. And we see even the value of, let's say, the Canadian Parliament adopting a resolution declaring that the persecution of the Rohingya amounts to genocide. But then there are other remedies which are more directly on point. For example, one of them is compensation. There is a duty of compensation to the victims on the part of Myanmar. There is also the uh, duty of restitution. Restitution basically uh, placing people in the same situation as they were before the commission of the crime, which in practice means the safe and dignified return of the Rohingya to their homes. So this may seem like a tall order, but those are the remedies that we have requested. And of course, in respect of the International Criminal Court, which is a different jurisdiction, the so-called remedy really is a criminal prosecution of an individual, followed by appropriate punishment, which is generally a term of imprisonment. But even there, when there is an arrest warrant, even if someone is never arrested, the mere existence of an arrest warrant becomes a very serious liability. At the very least, it profoundly undermines the legitimacy of people um, who are in positions of power and authority. So I hope that answered your question in some fashion.
Thank you very much, Clint and Dr. Payam Akhavan, for a brilliant response to this question. So now I would like to welcome Mark Harbison. If you would like to pose a question to the professor, Mark, floor is yours. Unmute. Yeah, just unmute. Yeah, here you go.
Yeah, my goodness. This is an aspect of the problem in Myanmar that I haven't really considered, and I am absolutely awestruck by Professor Akhavan's efforts in the ICC and the ICJ. Um, I have always looked at this issue from the perspective of what can be done in Myanmar. Uh, my personal view is that the Rohingya are not going home anytime soon, so that most of their current issues are in Bangladesh, in the camps. Uh, how to make that situation even marginally better. Uh, but to hear this aspect of it, I think this is a vital exercise in human rights and in actually not just pinpointing or highlighting, putting in the spotlight the government of Myanmar, but also the international community. Uh, the responsibility of major, why is a small country like the Gambia taking the lead on this? Why isn't it the United States or why isn't it EU? Uh, so I think that spotlight function of bringing world opinion to bear is absolutely vital, and I so much highly respect the work you're doing, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your kind words. I would begin first by saying that this is really a question of human duty. We're not doing anybody a favor by fighting for justice. It's our responsibility. And I would add that there are, numerous co-conspirators, if you like, who are not perhaps as visible as I am, who've done extraordinary things behind the scenes to move this forward. But I really sincerely mean that it is such an incredible privilege to be able to do this work. And some people thought I was insane spending my summer vacation in the middle of the pandemic in the refugee camps, I could not have imagined a better way to spend my summer. And the bond that I've developed with our Rohingya brothers and sisters is just so deeply humbling and inspiring. So thank you very much for your kind words and for the wonderful work that the Rotary clubs are doing around the world.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you. Now I welcome Dr. Helal Mohiuddin. He is the Director, Research and Communication at the Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, co-founder of this organization. And he also teaches at North-South University. And I do want to remind the audience that Professor Payam Akhavan, I think 2 months ago, had a whole half-day session, and I joined at quite late night here just to listen to his words. So Professor Payam has spoken in the North-South University where Dr. Hilal teaches now, and Conflict and Resilience Research Institute is also a collaborator with the Center for Peace Studies where Professor Payam spoke. So Dr. Hilal, floor is yours, please now. Unmute, please.
Oh, thank you very much, Professor Akhavan. And it's my pleasure to hear you once again. I heard your speech at the North-South University 2 or 3 months ago, and I asked you a question as well. I don't know whether you can remember or not. So it is a great pleasure to hear you once again back, and we got the recap of the speeches that you have given that time, and now we got even a better summary than that time. We have a lot of questions about Rohingya problems and their solution, legal possibilities of making legal bindings for the Myanmar and the military for committing genocide. But I have two very specific questions to you. One is about the two soldiers who testified lately that they took part in committing genocidal activities under the order of their senior officers in Myanmar. It is a very important development indeed, but we are curious to know whether they have given enough safety or security there, and safety and security is ensured, and whether we can expect some more soldiers to come up and testify to the International Court of Justice. This is one. Do you see any prospect or any possibilities of some more soldiers to come up to testify in front of the judges in the Court of Justice? This is one. And the second one is about Mr. Tambadu's resignation. He is no more an Attorney General or a law minister in Gambia, and it created some confusion in Bangladesh, especially in the Rohingya camps. They lost hope right after listening to the news, hearing the news that he is not going to act on behalf of them again anymore. But we also saw some optimism. Today we are very optimistic after hearing you, and optimism is abound, I must say, at this moment, because Bangladesh has done a great job. I don't think there would be any other countries who would be sheltering 1 million, more than 1 million people who are homeless. And Bangladesh has also became instrumental in mobilizing OIC and mobilizing these two soldiers as well. Now we understand that very well, that Bangladesh is doing its part very well. So the question is whether that will affect, especially Mr. Tambadu's resignation, will affect the process. So my two questions are over, but the last one is an anecdote. It's about the civil society. Now we don't really expect too much from the big powers that can make a big difference, but probably they will come up at some point out of their box political trickeries and other things. Probably they will just join to the human rights, uh, commitments that they already made before, especially in 1948. So they might come up at some point. But the civil societies, I see that Bangladeshi civil societies are quite vocal, not civil societies, some of the organizations like ours, Conflict and Resilience Institutes, or a few NGOs, especially those who are working in the camp or in the Cox's Bazar area, they are actively working for the Rohingya flights. But how can we get more civil society engagements in not only in Bangladesh but beyond Bangladesh, especially globally, to speak for them, especially to ensure that Myanmar is held completely accountable for whatever the ICJ has endorsed on them, that they have to report to ICJ timely, whether they are going to report it timely, or whether we have any watchdogs, local or international watchdogs, to see whether Myanmar is really complying with the IGC verdict, or they are still trying to play games, because they have it, especially Myanmar has a tendency to play games all the time. We have seen that even in the last bilateral agreements between Bangladesh and Myanmar, it was a trap. We all know by now that okay, they are still buying times and trying to play game with time buying. Still, they are doing that. So, how much they will comply is, it's just a confusion among the Rohingyas, among Bangladeshi common people, and other human rights activists and research organizations like ours, that okay, these confusions are still there. So I would be very pleased to hear your reflection about these 3 points. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, sir, and it's a pleasure to see you again. I was actually at North South University in March of this year, more than 2, 3, just before the beginning of the pandemic. So I remember also being in the presence of Mr. Shahidul Hoq, who to me is a great champion in Bangladesh of this important cause. In respect of your question regarding the two persons of interest, I unfortunately cannot make any comments specific to who those two people are and what their present location is and what measures have been taken to protect them. That's all confidential. But what I can say is that they are not the only two people. There have been, as you can imagine, thousands of soldiers, foot soldiers, who have been forcibly conscripted, many of them from ethnic minorities that themselves are persecuted in Myanmar. And I've seen this again and again, that people who are the executioners for various reasons may desert, they may defect, they may regret what they have done. So I certainly don't think that these are the only two people that would have felt that way. In the case of the Srebrenica genocide, I remember working on a case of a man named Dražen Erdemović, a young man who participated in the mass executions in Srebrenica and subsequently confessed. He confessed out of genuine remorse for what he had done. So I think with the passage of time, more and more people will come forward and they will confess. In respect of my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Abu Bakr Tambadu, he, to the best of my knowledge, simply resigned for personal reasons. He's at The Hague now as the registrar of the United Nations residual mechanisms for the tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, which is now wrapping up its work. And Mr. Jallo, is now the new agent of the Gambia, and there is absolutely no sign whatsoever, despite the loss of our dear friend, Mr. Tambadu, that the Gambia has in any way wavered in its commitments. And I can tell you that we are moving ahead with full force within 1 month to file the memorial and to vigorously litigate this case. Nothing has changed, and I sent that message to our friends in Kutupalong. And finally, your question regarding civil society. Civil society has played and will continue to play a very important role. There are now a number of Rohingya NGOs, some older than others, and like other diasporas and communities that have experienced exile and persecution, they are organizing themselves. They are learning how to basically use the system to protect their rights. And we have here in Canada the likes of my dear friend Yasminullah, who I'm sure you know from Vancouver, who has been one of the very eloquent voices in Canada for the Rohingya community. And there are many others spread across the world, in Malaysia, in the United Kingdom, and in Bangladesh as well. There are a number of civil society organizations, but of course, perhaps in Bangladesh, humanitarian relief is the more pressing need, with organizations such as BRAC and others. Accountability is just one issue, one issue among others. It is, of course, an important issue, but I can understand that in Bangladesh, the immediate task of providing food and medicine and shelter and education and basic needs to these people has to compete in some respects, maybe not compete, but exist side by side with these broader questions of accountability.
Thank you, Professor. So that's all we had from the floor. But now I'm going to take some questions from our audiences, those who have tuned from Bangladesh and all around the globe, I believe. And before I flush the question, I have one simple question to you, Professor. We all wonder, of course, Gambia joined as a moral torchbearer in this case, but why not Bangladesh itself? Is there any technical legalities that you see prevented Bangladesh from taking the course directly to the ICJ, or is it Bangladesh government's decision not to pursue as a claimant or the pursuer of the case?
That's a very good question, Dr. Ahmed, and I really cannot answer it. I'm not a representative of the Bangladesh government beyond the ICC matter. But what's important is that Bangladesh participated very actively and vocally within the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and co-chairs the committee that specifically addresses the ICJ case together with the Gambia. So Bangladesh has certainly not been absent from this process, but you would have to ask the government itself that specific question that you have raised.
Thank you, sir. So a couple of questions that has come in, sir, and one is here, and it says in the beginning, it's referring to your opening statement that we failed many a times to stop genocide. Why so? What should be done? Who will do it? It's a very broad question, we understand, but people want to know repetition of world bodies failure. So this is the question, but I think there is a similar question posed by another audience, and I think you can see the whole question flashed. And in the last he's saying that we see Omar al-Bashir touring the world with arrest warrant. So yes, you're okay, Professor. Yeah.
Yes, I'm fine. Yes, I'm fine.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. So I'm sorry, I missed the first question. If you
Oh,
could.
I mean, the first question was, sir, it's a general question that in the initial beginning of the state session, you said that time and again we have seen we have failed to stop genocide. So why do you think it happens, and what should be done, and who
Yes,
will
yes,
actually? Yeah.
yes. Well, it's a very good question. Um, it's important to mention that genocide is not like an earthquake or tsunami. It's not a sort of a God-made disaster. It's a man-made disaster, and it takes tremendous amounts of effort to incite hatred, to isolate the target group. It takes a tremendous amount of planning and resources to have soldiers go and burn 400 villages and to kill thousands of people. So genocides are invariably conspiracies. They are not spontaneous outbursts of hatred. So that's why we need to think in terms of the prevention of genocide. And there are early warning signs which are typical of situations which can escalate into genocidal violence. So the second point is that unfortunately there are politics there, and politics all too often trump humanitarian values. This is an ongoing struggle. It's nothing new. Even in the former Yugoslavia, when we were trying to prosecute the genocidal killers, we were told that prosecutions would get in the way of peace negotiations, the so-called peace versus justice debate. Don't make life difficult for us. Just shut up and sweep everything under the carpet. Let's forget about the past, the kind of imposed amnesia, and let's move on. And then people realize that actually that's unrealistic. Never mind immoral, it's unrealistic in the context of an ethnic war, which was deliberately instigated through incitement to hatred and violence, to let the same people, the same pyromaniacs that fan the flames of hatred and war to stay in power. What kind of peace and stability are you going to achieve? So it's the same thing in Myanmar and everywhere else in the world, that impunity for genocide is hardly a recipe for stability. It's completely foolish to think that it is. So we have to change our way of thinking. We have to engage with decision makers and reimagine what peace and stability and prosperity means. Would we not be in an infinitely better place today if instead of genocidal violence, the Rohingya were given full rights as citizens in Myanmar and were to that society, as they did after independence for many years before this campaign of incitement and violence brought us to this terrible place today. So we need to start changing our discourse on what peace and prosperity and stability and what political realism means. We are being told unrealistic things in the name of realism. And I hope that these accountability mechanisms will prove that point, will show people that, in fact, in the long run, this is a very low cost, high impact investment. And accountability in the long run is going to be in the best interest of everyone involved.
Thank you, Professor. We'll just take one or two more questions just to be cautious about time. So here's the next question. Those who are already around 600,000 Rohingyas still are in Rakhine, as far as we know. So, sir, what do you think in terms of protection of those Rohingyas, and how I mean, is there any protocol, sir, you have seen within the ICJ declaration that once they go back, they would remain safe from persecution of the Myanmar government?
Well, this is a very good question, but I'm not sure I am qualified to answer it. I'm not a Myanmar or Rohingya expert as such. I'm an international lawyer who's litigating this specific issue. But I think safe, well, at a basic level, safe means you don't have to worry that soldiers are going to come to your village and start killing and raping and burning. I mean, at that very, very basic level, that is what safety means. But in order to achieve that, there are wider questions of putting an end to the incitement of hatred, putting an end to the deprivation of citizenship rights and the systematic discrimination. So there is a spectrum. There's a spectrum, and in a sense, stripping people of citizenship because of their racial or religious identity, inciting hatred against them, that invariably is the beginning of the road that leads to genocidal violence at the end.
Thank you, sir. Last question, but these are similar questions. One is asking, how do you see Canada's role in supporting Rohingya case at ICJ, which was recently been made public in Canada? And also here, the second question is, how do you see Canada's community social movement can strengthen the supporting role of ICJ?
Thank you. Those are very good questions, and I'm glad you reminded me because I think Canada has played a very, very important role in the Rohingya crisis, beginning with the appointment of Mr. Bob Rae as the special envoy, who's now our distinguished ambassador at the United Nations, and who has made clear that the issue remains close to his heart, and who still engages with that at the United Nations. And of course, the General Assembly is now in session. The announcement by Canada and the Netherlands that they would intervene in the ICJ case, of course, is very significant. It sends a very important signal to the ICJ, to the international community, that this isn't just the Gambia, this isn't just Bangladesh, but there is in effect what I call an alliance of accountability. That all of these nations are coming together in the name of a greater humanity. And that's very significant in building a new culture of international politics where humanitarian considerations begin to predominate rather than always taking the back seat. I think that on the whole, Canada's record in this respect has been very good. So if I was to say that civil society should engage with the Rohingya community in Canada, I would think that there are probably a long list of other issues as well, which would be very helpful. But I would suggest that you need to ask them what they think would be most important. And I know that there are, other than my dear friend Yasmin in Vancouver, there are a number of Rohingya activists who I've had the pleasure of seeing in the Kitchener-Waterloo area in southern Ontario. And there are organizations which, as I said, have been recently formed. And I would encourage you to contact them and to see through a dialogue what they believe would be valuable to their cause.
Thank you, Professor Payam Akhavan, for your splendid presentation today. We are so grateful. So, dear audience, we would like to draw close this session today. And before we say goodbye, we just wanted to go back to Professor Payam Akhavan to listen to his last words, what he sees in the future, his vision with this conflict, and his overall vision and for the human rights activities and in the world. Because as you know, I referred in the beginning, he had a brilliant speech in 2017, Road to Justice. So your last words, sir, before we say goodbye.
Well, my belief, I'm a member of the persecuted Baha'i minority in Iran, and my own family fled persecution, and we've been in exile in Canada now for 45 years. And our belief is that the earth is but one country and humankind its citizens. We are all one, members of one race, members of one family. And the sooner that we realize that, the better it will be for all of us. And this isn't just some kind of naive ideal. It's an inescapable reality. We live in an inextricably interdependent world. And those that are sowing hatred and division and violence are not only immoral, but they're on the wrong side of history, and they will lose. And I think that we should never underestimate our own power in speaking truth to justice. Hatred and violence is the refuge of cowards and the refuge of the weak. So we should always stand on the side of truth and justice. We should never be discouraged or deterred. And I have no doubt that those of us that believe in this greater humanity will triumph in the end.
Thank you, sir. Once again, these are really powerful words, and we'd like to encourage the audience to keep listening. It would be hopefully with the permission of our Professor Payam Akhavan would be in archive. Just listen to the last few words that he spoke. Truth to the power, truth to justice, and these are in fact the universal, hope for everybody. Those who are on the victim side of the issue. Dear audience, before you go, let's also share with you that Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada closely works with many of the Rohingya diaspora communities within Canada, and there are 5 organizations to our knowledge with who we interacted in the past. And in the web archive of our website, you will find the dialogues that took place between May and today with some of these groups. And we hope that a resolution of the crisis comes sooner than later. And before we go, tomorrow we have another very important webinar with Senator Marilu McFadden, and she's going to share her experience of Canada's support to the ICJ. So please tune in tomorrow at 1 p.m. The Central Standard Time, and you will hear possibly similar echo in supporting the case. And before I say or close this session, as Professor Payam Akhavan is very conversant with Rabindranath Tagore, let me just recite some of the words from his famous poem and song in Bengali, Jodi tor ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে, and English a very
I think I am not quite sure what happened, but anyway, he is disconnected. And dear audiences, it is just, please go ahead alone if there is no one to be your associate. That's what it is. যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে. Please go ahead alone if there is no associate with you or co-worker with you. Okay, that's it. And we are expecting Dr. Kausar to show up again. I don't know whether he is trying to resolve the technical issues. But Mark is also absent here. I can't just thank Dr. Payam for making time for Conflict and Resilience Research Institute. We have been trying to make a difference. Our focus is very specific, and Dr. Kausar is already here. He is back, so probably he will continue the rest. And we are looking for your advice, very humble advice for us. We are a very small organization, but we are focusing mostly on Rohingya issues. We don't have any other issues in hand at this moment because we think this is the pressing demand at this moment. The Rohingyas will be there in Bangladesh for the next 20 or 25 years. We are foreseeing that. As you said that, okay, delaying is not really bad in these situations, especially for having long-lasting justice, sustainable justice. And we are very optimistic. We know that something will happen for sure since you are involved in this movement, and you dedicated all your energies and a new momentum is going to be created. We are pretty sure about that. So we are very hopeful about that, and we also we are very eager to cooperate any movement, new movement or new moves. and at the grassroots we can also make some differences. And we would really welcome any of your advice or suggestions for Creek, how we might contribute in your work, or we can work with you collaboratively, or we can assemble some documents from the field level. Since I am in Bangladesh, I can assemble some documents from the field levels if you need. So that's how Conflict and Resilience Research Institute can also be a part of this grand humanitarian movement. Thank you.
Thank
And
you. Thank you, and Khuda Hafiz.
Khuda Hafiz. Thank you, Professor. And dear audience, goodbye. And we'd like to leave all of you with the hope that justice will be delivered for the Rohingyas and the efforts taken by Professor Payam Akhavan and his team. Thank you, Stefan, wherever you are. And a very good afternoon from Conflict and Resilience Research Institute. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.